Let's see. Oh, now we have sound. Good morning, everyone, here in Sharm el Sheikh, but also everyone on the live stream. And a warm welcome to this Finance Day of COP27. My name is Fredrik Ekström. I am president of Nasdaq Stockholm, the exchange in Sweden. And with us today, we have a very strong panel. We have, first of all, here from Minesto, CEO Martin Edlund. Welcome. We have from the Swedish Energy Agency, Verena Adamheit. Was that correct? Good. You are country manager for US, and we will come back to that. That's an interesting role. And then we also have Normative and Alexander Schmidt, who is head of research and science at Normative. And we will have a fourth member of the panel quite soon. Anders Elgerud, CEO of Stockholm Exergi, is on his way. He is stuck in Egypt traffic. So why do we have a finance day at an environmental conference? I think without capital, without allocation of capital into both green companies and also not so green companies but that are under transition, we will never be able to reach any targets of the Paris Agreement or any other targets set to reach a more sustainable finance market and society. And in this reallocation of capital that needs to happen at quite dramatic levels, I think collaboration is key. Collaboration between public funding, private funding, and within private funding, I'm talking about exchange, you could be bank debt, private equity, and all of this has to work together to really help companies grow as part of doing this transition. In Sweden, and I should also say thank you to Business Sweden for arranging this and to having the opportunity to have this dialogue today with this panel and with other companies that are here promoting Sweden, but also explaining what we actually do in Sweden around this transition. And in the Nordic region, and especially in Sweden, we have been the leading market for growth companies in Europe, the leading market for green tech companies. And many of these green tech companies, they have the innovation and the solution that we really need to be able to solve some of the challenges we have in respect of the climate. So I think we should be really proud of our market and the innovation and the entrepreneurship that exists in Sweden. And there is an ecosystem here with public agencies like the Swedish Energy Agency, entrepreneurs, startups, advisors, us at Nasdaq, but the whole ecosystem also with investors that support the journey of these growth companies, because many companies comes to the market in an IPO, but they need to continue to raise capital through their journey to be able to grow and in the long run hopefully become a large company and create jobs and welfare for society. So with that introduction, I think we have a fantastic panel that will help us explain a little bit about the importance of the allocation of capital, about green tech companies, and a little bit share their perspective of their own journey. So with that, I would like to maybe ask Martin the first question. Minesto was, if I'm correctly understand, originally a spin-off from a company called Saab, and then you have received public funding, you have come to the exchange, you are listed companies today. How have this journey with a combination of public funding and private company impacted your company?
It's actually been in the core of maybe this one works better. Yes, I think that Minesto, we are a company that turns ocean currents and tidal currents into renewable electricity. So it's a highly novel company from the aircraft manufacturer Saab, a spin-out. And our journey, I think, is a good example of a company that really has benefited from the synergistic, the collaborative environment in Sweden around public and private funding. So we started out as a spin-out from Saab, was put in an incubator called Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship in Gothenburg at the Technical University. So already there were sort of public funding going into setting up the company. Then as a pre-listed journey for several years to prove the technology with private and public money in combination. And then a listing in 2016 at Nasdaq, 2015-2016. And that listing was enabled also by public grants, EU funding. So basically the offer to the initial investors was that by investing in Minesto, you double your investments because we can bring down public grants at the same level as the equity coming into the company. And then we've had a few more rounds, and we're up to now 30,000 shareholders on Nasdaq First North growth markets. So I think it's one of actually many companies that has sort of benefited from this, if we may call it, ecosystem or synergistic setup.
Thank you. And Verena, the Swedish Energy Agency, what do you do? And as I understand, you also been part of this journey of Minesto. Can you tell a little bit more how you see your role in helping green tech companies and what you actually do to support them?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much for having us. We are from the Swedish Energy Agency, a government agency with the mission to lead society's transformation towards a sustainable energy system. And we have actually a quite broad assignment which leads from providing expert knowledge over to disseminating information to make energy transition happen more quickly, to financing companies and research, and that's what my pillar is within. And I'm very happy to stand next to Minesto, one of our portfolio companies, and to see you succeed. So this is great. Coming back to your question, what we do within the third pillar of financing research, this is what we do in both direct financial support and indirect support. And this is quite unique, I guess, supporting companies throughout the whole innovation chain, from fundamental research to verification with customers, to pilots and demonstration, all this commercialization bid to internationalization also. And here we have support programs focusing on chosen markets, the US, which is my role, one of them, and also with platforms. We're supporting certain focus areas which we have chosen because they represent Swedish key strengths, such smart cities, sustainable heating and cooling, sustainable healthcare, bioenergy, which we really can in Sweden. So that's what we do, which is our assignment. And then the second thing is that we also support projects. And this is our largest assignment, for example, with our program, the Industrial Leap, which is all about decarbonizing the industry.
And if I can ask you a follow-up question here, what is sort of, when you select this project and supporting companies, what are your sort of criteria and what is you sort of, how do you define success for an investment from the Swedish Energy Agency?
Yes, this is of course one of the most central questions we have to answer. So the first thing is of course the innovation, the product, the solution. Will it make impact? Will it contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? That's of course the most obvious thing. But then it's also about feasibility. It's about the outreach, it's about the impact possibilities, and it's of course about the team. And here we also like to see both women and men in the team, so that's really what is important to us. And as regards internationalization, we also want to see that the company has kind of a proven technology, has a strong foothold in Sweden, has customers to make it on the international markets. And here we also want to see a clear business plan of the companies.
Thank you. Alexander, Verena talked about impact and Normative. You measure impact in a specific way. Can you tell us a little bit how you see your role as a green tech company and how you help define impact.
Yes, I'm happy to. When you can hear me? Yeah, perfect. So I think it's super interesting just what you described. So Normative, our mission is to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all economic activities on the planet. So that's meaning like we have our own growth journey in kind of the green tech space, if you want, like as a software as a service solution. At the same time, we help, of course, to make known and reduce the impact other companies have. So especially in the financial sector, we have right now a partnership with Nordea to help them to accurately assess the portfolio emissions, to then also help to funnel investments into companies that are, you can say, comparatively more sustainable. And we also yesterday talked about a new scoring framework that actually helps to assess how do we capture sustainability in a single number to make it really easy on the surface, to single number to see how far are they in the transition to net zero emissions. And this kind of like the dual role we have, our own growth journey through investors and investments. At the same time, we're helping to make it more transparent for everyone to know where to invest, to avoid investing in the end in stranded assets.
So you support corporates, but you actually then also support investors by providing data on the impact of companies.
I would say by extension, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So they are all, you would say, in the portfolio of partners and customers. So we are definitely, we see the largest impact that we can have is working together with enterprises through the ranks. It can be banks like SEB, one of our customers, Nordea. It can also be just, you know, the large enterprises who are all present here today, for example. So they have these large value chains. They need to decarbonize the value chains. That is a huge, huge challenge for them. And we help them to make it really transparent. Where do the hotspots sit in their portfolio or in their value chains? That is kind of the flip side. Finance's portfolio for a manufacturing company. It's the physical value chain. And then they have the full oversight to make actually informed decisions based on our measurements of carbon emissions.
Okay, thank you. And Martin, renewable energy is super high on the agenda. And it's almost impossible to not be in an event here at COP and not hear the word renewable energy. So does that mean that your future is super bright and there is no challenges, or what are the opportunities and also challenges for a company like Minesto, who are still quite early in your journey?
Yeah, I think that most companies, and Minesto certainly also, face a rather large challenge in that to prove your technology, it's not just enough to produce to the grid as we're doing at small scale today. But it's a matter of doing rather large infrastructure investments to reach project levelized cost of energy, so to speak. And that means that you have to draw down different sources of funding for your projects in parallel with running your business and building your capacity to deliver and increase performance of what you're doing. So I think that challenge is quite significant because those investments are high relative to the core investments in the company. And if you look at the capital markets and funds labeled green funds, it's still very, let's say, banking driven in many aspects, where a smaller return on your investments is more sought than high risk projects. And if it's a first of a kind renewable energy system that is going to be deployed at large scale, there are a risk factor to the investment. So I think that's one of the major challenges. On the other hand, as you say, the climate for investments in renewable energy has never been as positive and optimistic as it is today. And I think that the combination of the international development banks, EU structures, national entities such as the Swedish Energy Agency enables those project investments by lowering the risk factor, by providing sort of a financial cushion into the projects. So by combining those sources, I'd say that it's possible to overcome the scale of the investments needed.
When you talk about renewable energy, there is a lot of focus on wind power, solar power, and the politicians has a lot of focus on those type of renewable sources. A company that are more innovative, looking for maybe sort of solutions that are not as established yet as wind power, for example. Is it easy to get attraction, or is all focus on these large established renewable energy sources, or can you get attraction?
I think if you look at where we are with our energy transition in the areas of the world where we have somewhat higher level of penetration for the renewables, we see the clear challenges of just betting on solar and wind. It's intermittent, and the concept of base load renewables is potentially the number one sales argument in relationship to investors for us. So the complementarity is known. We know that if we overinvest in wind for one energy system, one energy market, we're going to end into trouble both when the wind is blowing a lot and when the wind is not blowing. So cost-wise, you have to add a lot of storage and compensation on the higher system level of the energy system. And that is an open door for us where we are now, definitely, because tides and ocean currents are baseload type of energy.
And Verena, Martin mentioned that for many maybe more innovative companies, startup, even if Minesto is not a startup, the public funding element of it as a risk reducing part for other private investors to come into that company or project that must be a very important role for you to sort of play that sort of risk reducing factor by coming in. And how do you see the collaboration between sort of you representing public funding and private funding? How important is it, and is it working well, or can we do better?
Yes, that's of course the initial task of a state, to go in as a first investor, as you want to put it like that. We give grants, we don't invest in companies, but that's what we do, to go into these early companies with a seed funding, with this also what I mentioned with the verification for CAN, to pave the way for other investors that then eventually can come in. So we take as a state the biggest risk, and I think it's very important because we all need to work together in this famous innovation ecosystem to make innovation come true. And we as a public funder, we are of course a big player in this, but then others have to come in, the investors and the corporates have to work together with the startups. And we also have the academic side, of course, which provides research and can go together in projects. So we see us as one of many players within the whole system. And I think we are, if I may say this very humbly, we are doing already well, but of course there's always room for improvement. We have to engage in this dialogue even better, to be more transparent of what our expectations are, what the expectations of the others are, to make sure that we understand each other, because sometimes there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of understanding, the lack of requirements. We as a government agency have very clear requirements. For a company, you certainly know what to speak about. So maybe this communicating bit is the one we can improve on.
Alexander?
I can actually add to this, because I think you're entirely right. Communication and information. What we often experience is also that information has to come from some kind of data source. And especially if you talk about green investments or investments that are labeled sustainable or green, oftentimes it's a lack of data that we experience there on our customer side, or the customer experience a lack of data. So that is important to kind of bridge that gap. We see also that many companies who are committed publicly to actually, improve their own footprint, improve their own sustainability journey, they themselves still have a lack of data, a lack of insights into how exactly can they follow through with this commitment. So that's, I think, super important to mention as well. Information, communication, and data kind of as the foundation. And for us, it's kind of the accurate data to assess a company's environmental impact.
Yeah, and
May I comment
of
directly
course.
on that? Because we see that this information you're speaking about is increasingly sought after. You mentioned the word labeling, this green labeling, and this is something I think will not work in the future because the objectification of this labeling is increasingly important to make sure that you don't say words, but that you really live your message, and you have to prove that with data.
100%. Do you want to?
Yeah, I also wanted to add that it's not just about financing. When you're through an evaluation with, for example, the Swedish Energy Agency, it's also a stamp of quality. And that's something you see also when you, I mean, we are sort of an export company 100% because we don't have a natural resource in Sweden. But by having sort of that backing from the official Sweden, so to speak, is a key factor to create certainty in an uncertain context, so to speak.
Yeah, and we are in this transition. We have science-based target initiatives as a way to guideline corporates on how to set targets to reach net zero at a certain time in the future. And we now have, I think, around 2,500 companies worldwide that have signed science-based target initiatives, meaning that they have committed to set targets and to follow through. And where we are in the process now is that many companies do set targets, they get the targets approved, but how do we follow up? How do we know that the targets set are also being delivered on? And Alexander, I assume that's where Normative come in to some extent at least.
100%, yes. It's so funny. We chatted a bit about it before. So this number around like a bit more than 2,000 commitments to science-based, actually approved commitments to science-based targets. We talked about this actually on Monday with Professor Johan Rockström a bit. We have done some research on how this actually would impact global emissions. If you look at if those companies were to follow through with their commitments. So we had this sample of 1,000 publicly traded companies that have set targets that are in line with the Paris Agreement, so meaning we limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if you add those emissions up, if you really look at the entire impact, and that is the important piece, we really have to look at the entire impact, not just on, let's say, what comes out of their own chimneys or tailpipes. If we add all of those up, so value chain, investment portfolios, we actually reach 77% of global emissions from fossil fuels and industry. So these 1,000 companies, large companies, they can actually have a huge impact. If, and there's a big if, of course, if they were to follow through with, first of all, accurate measurement, because we still see a huge gap. If we now look at what companies have committed to in terms of CO2 amount, we're not there. We have the commitments, but the CO2 amount that is right now behind the commitments is far off. So there is this gap, this logical gap between, yes, I want to do it, at the same time, I might be struggling to put this into an actionable plan that is accurate. And it's also to your point, we have this, you didn't mention the word, but we often talk about unintentional greenwashing to a certain degree. You might commit, sincerely, genuinely to a target, but due to lack of data, you fall into this trap of being ultimately exposed as, hey, there is this gap. And this is, of course, especially for a publicly traded company, this is something that can have a huge reputational and brand equity risk.
Thank you. And we are now halfway through this panel a little bit, and that's when the energy used to dip a little bit. So we're going to invite Anders from Stockholm Exergi to enter the stage to create new energy into the panel and a new discussion or element of things. Welcome, Anders.
Thanks a lot.
And you are the CEO of Stockholm Exergi, and we have been talking a lot about sort of green tech companies, the need of funding, the collaboration between public funding and private funding. And from your perspective, you have a very big project ongoing around biomass carbon capture storage as part of your business. How important is it for you in relation to public and private funding as a combination of making this journey?
Thanks, Fredrik, for the question, and I think it's totally crucial that we both have public funding and also private funding. When we look at this project which we are aiming to fulfill, it's actually a project which we are pioneer, definitely. have done this before in this size. We are doing it. Okay, it's it's another. Okay, it's just to continue. So when setting up this industry, which might be a very, very large industry, and also is necessary for the rest of the world, we need really removal of carbon dioxide. And then starting that kind of project, for us as a company, we're a very mid-sized, small energy company in Sweden, it's impossible, more or less. It's innovation, it's large investments, we need public funding in the start, but then we need to see the market potential is enormous, and then we need to also have the opportunity also to have private funding, and then we are looking into how can we combine these two funding as way of funding.
We have talked quite a lot about renewable energy as a super important source of this sustainable transition. This carbon capture and storage, what is that? What is that in relation to renewable energy? And is that a potential new industry segment within Sweden where Sweden could be a leader, do you think?
Definitely. I think in Sweden we have the opportunity, since there is a lot of forest in Sweden. There will be a lot of residues from the forest which otherwise will be lost. That are the main fuel we are using. It's the only fuel we are using in this plant. Then we are actually producing both electricity, then heat, and then we are actually capturing the CO2 from the chimney on the flue gases. And that technology is extremely resource efficient, since we also have district heating in Sweden. So we utilize the excess heat from the whole process, meaning that we actually increase the efficiency of the whole process with 3 to 5%. So without utilizing more biomass, without using more other energy, we can actually capture carbon in the magnitude in one of our plant, same as the emission from all the traffic in Stockholm, a large city, during a whole year. And then actually when we have captured the carbon, we can actually transport it in liquefied form and then permanently store it under sea level in rock, which are actually fantastic way of getting away and really remove carbon from the atmosphere without using more resources, without harming the environment, and actually doing it in a permanent way for thousands of years.
I don't think people understand what panel we have here today. This must be the best panel in COP. Look at it. You have renewable energy, the solution for how to take down current emission from the 50 gigaton levels. We have then what we cannot reduce, we can remove with BioCSS. All of this needs money, so we have the Swedish Energy Agency to support that. And we have Normative to help calculate the impact of everything. So if you can talk together now, maybe we have a really good solution after this, how to move forward. But with that, let's move on. And I have a question for you, Verena. Your role, Country Manager US for Sweden Energy Agency. What role does the Swedish Energy Agency has in the US?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to pitch the new Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative that we have launched this year, because this is a very important project for us, and we spoke about communicating and collaborating, and this is kind of a way of new collaboration. So we have started this initiative together with our partners from Business Sweden, the Sweden Innovation Agency, Vinnova, and the Embassy in Washington, to promote Sweden as a key partner for the US green transition and provide information about the Swedish key solutions and products to make this energy transition happen. So we have soon 4 resources in place in Washington, 3 in Washington, 1 in the Silicon Valley. Together we have agreed on several working streams which we deem are of utmost importance. And there is, for example, supporting SMEs, Swedish SMEs. This is to promote Sweden as an investment destination, because we have very good conditions for investments in Sweden. We want to work for establishing system demonstrators. We of course want to engage in conferences and trade fairs to give Swedish companies a chance to expose their message. So this is what we think very important, because we see that there are large opportunities in the US right now, and these resources that we have in place are supposed to be kind of a matchmaker, a mediator between Swedish interests and also US interests. So what we really want to do is to reach out a hand, and that's what our role as initiators is. That's what we can do. We can initiate, we can give offers, we can make the first step, as we were also in earlier. So we are looking after project ideas, new partners that want to come in, want to join the initiative, that have ideas of how to promote collaboration, more cooperation. So if you are a Swedish company or a US company interested in context to Sweden, please reach out, because now it's the right time.
And I mean, all of you are, I would say, very sort of innovative, not sort of green tech companies. But how important is sort of the market outside Sweden? How important is that we reach out with all of this innovation and technologies and solutions outside Sweden? Martin?
Well, it's both from a business and from sort of a sustainability perspective, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the emissions in Sweden is, I mean, it's insignificant from a global context. I mean, I spent 3 weeks in Asia meeting around 40 stakeholders from governments, industry, and all over, and I mean, the challenges they're facing are enormous compared to what we're facing in many aspects. But I also see that by pushing harder in our end of things, we will stimulate change in the other end. And I think measuring or following up on carbon footprints and emissions is, if we stand firm there and we demand of our value chains all the way down to be sort of counted and considered in this, we already now see that, for instance, mining companies in Indonesia, they are drivers of the energy transition, from brown coal and oil, gas, diesel gensets to sustainable solutions, because they want to be a part of those global value chains, supply chains, and they will be excluded if they're not switching into input products with a lesser carbon footprint. So the global perspective is everything.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a perfect pitch for what I also was promoting, like how we work with enterprises, right? I mean, if you are committed to reaching net zero, that does not just mean that you look at your own office buildings and say, hey, I have renewable electricity coming into my sockets. No, I have to go through my entire value chain, and I have to make sure my suppliers are on board, or I can engage with them, or ultimately I have to switch them if there's just no way that I can engage them. But ideally, we take everyone on board and have this transition globally. So there are only very few companies who are really producing everything locally, so to speak, in the local context. For them, it might be more regional focus, but eventually I can think of almost no example where you cannot avoid looking beyond your own country borders and having to make this global network work.
If I take it from perspective, it is of course necessary to both do the reduction in every company as far as you can, so you can come close to net zero. But you will never be net zero without also adding removals, and that's more or less a fact. And then I think it's very, very crucial that we can show the rest of the world that it is actually possible in different ways. This is one way, which we are doing, the biocarbon capture and storage. That's one way of creating enormous amount of removals. Only in Sweden we can create 30 million tons of removals. And that will also start a new industry which will create 28,000 full-time job. If we calculate it, we have done it in a thoroughly study, and it will also give the gross domestic product a very high lift. But I think that is example which actually can be followed by the rest of the world. Maybe then not the exact technology will be the technology which will be used in the United States or in other parts of the world. Maybe there is ducks better with direct air and carbon capture. But I think showing these kind of examples is necessary, and there Sweden has a really good opportunity also to show the rest of the world it's possible, and it's possible to do it also with the healthy economy.
Yeah, and to put your 30 million ton into perspective, I think today globally we maybe remove a couple of 100,000 tons from the atmosphere on an annual basis. So if Sweden can go to 30 million ton, that's going to be a big number and a very important number. I was at a dinner yesterday where John Kerry had held a speech, and he was saying that if he would start a business now, really he would go into this green tech area, because the business case is fantastic. The need for renewable energy, removing carbon from the atmosphere, all the surrounding solutions to support this journey, to be able to reach sort of the reduction, or sort of with almost 50% already by 2030. That's only 8 years away. So he was really saying that this is the business to be in, but financing and capital is key. Otherwise, it will not happen. So, maybe one question. This is the Swedish pavilion, and of course, we're talking about it from a Nordic perspective. But how do we attract foreign capital into all of our innovation that we have here in Sweden? Anyone wants to jump on that?
I can start a little bit. I think if we are talking about negative emissions, which I are doing, then there is no market for negative emissions today. There is no real market. How do you trade with negative emissions? The framework and regulation around negative emissions need to be in place. We have it for emission trading system. For emissions we have systems, but we need to have it also for negative emission. A framework which actually gives security both for private companies and also for us as a supplier of negative emission, that we can trade with this negative emission, and that we can do it in a way which actually are crystal clear, that we are not greenwashing. We are actually setting up a framework which actually will guide us towards the Paris Agreement. And then we need to have a framework for negative emissions, definitely. And then the financing can come, both from the private part and from the public.
From our perspective, I think it's quite easy to understand why there is sort of a global interest. It's a technology that is, let's label it a strategic energy technology for many areas of the world. So if you take offshore oil and gas actors in Southeast Asia, 10 years ago they would not call a company like Minesto, but now they are, so to speak. And the reason is, of course, that we enable a new natural resource previously unused by mankind. So I think that perspective for us is sort of the key focus moving forward, to blend in the investments we have from the Swedish stock market, the public investments, if I may call them so, with project-based finance at a global scale.
And I think that's, as I see our role also from Nasdaq and the exchange, is really to help inform the global community about all of these companies and all of these projects that are happening here, to be able to matchmake between capital and all of these companies and projects. Irena.
Yes, I would just want to add one aspect. Of course, we have this infrastructure, which is excellent, and we have renewable and fossil-free electricity, of course, which is a major factor. But there's one other thing, and this is more of a soft factor, which I also want to mention, to attract competence and companies, and this is Sweden's goal to be the first fossil-free welfare state. And I speak of the welfare state because all the social aspects of providing good work conditions, the framework for gender equality, for childcare, all these social security factors, I think, are very important for Sweden to attract companies and their workforce. We shouldn't forget about this strong asset in Sweden as well.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask you a final question. Same to all of you. It's a very easy one. And that is, do you believe that we will reach the target of reducing emission with 45% until 2030? And what needs to happen for that goal to be achieved? No one is... I see Alexander here.
I can give it a shot. I think the first thing we need to realize, being very realistic, we are not on track. We are far off from reaching this goal. That's a fact. There's no way around this. Is it still within reach? Yes, it is within reach. Do we need to make a huge turnaround? Yes, we do. I mentioned this number, or you mentioning the number again, around commitments, science-based, approved target setting and reduction targets. We are there. We have reached a certain critical mass of commitments. If they were followed through with the value chains, everything we talked about, we will get there. So we have the commitments. Now it is really about taking the next step, and the next step is taking action. Action can only be taken on basis of information that has to be accurate. So for us, it's the accurate assessment of our emissions, accurate measurements, in combination, also with, of course, accurate assessment of how can I remove parts that I cannot reduce. So I think those two, as we said before, go hand in hand with each other. But commitments are there. Now it's about accurate measurements and actions.
Thank you. I take that as a yes.
Yeah, I think there are many reasons to be really, really optimistic. I don't really think that investors and society has understood how, on what scale this transition is. This is the largest industrial revolution that we've seen on Earth. So what happened, 150 years ago is nothing in relationship to the investments that now are flowing into fixing the systems that are not good enough. And this also means that there will be a lot of new solutions that we're not aware of today that will speed up the transition and the change. And I think that's where the core of the optimism lies, that representing new solutions, not yet in the Bloomberg, trajectories, not yet in the researchers in Stefan Rockström's projections. So that's my source of optimism.
I take that as a second yes.
Yeah. Let me put your question into perspective. If you're asking me, will the politicians in the world be able to actually handle this climate crisis, I will be a little bit pessimistic. Because what I see is that they are voting 4 years or 5 years or 6 years, and they need to be voted. So that is the pessimistic message. The optimistic message I can see is that there are so many global companies now. There are many companies who actually have realized they need to do the journey. They need to do the journey to do the reduction. They need to do the journey to take away also and remove. And we can see it so clearly when we are also talking about negative emissions and also removals. So there is a trend which will be limited by the politicians. The industrial world have started to do this journey, and they can also see the opportunities in this journey where we actually can also create new jobs, new profitability, and in another way. So if I put these two together, I think that the second one will actually be the winner. So from that perspective, I'm optimistic. But that also means that all of us, we need to do our part. And that's it's not an easy road.
I agree, but we have 3 yes. And Verena, you're going to take this home.
Yeah, I really want to say yes, so I'll say yes. But as you all mentioned, that we really need to step up and work even more closely together to make this come true. So let's collaborate and pioneer the possible.
I think there was a very... Martin.
Yeah, I think the consumer perspective and the customer value perspective should be added. If we miss that one, the force of that, we're missing one driver in this. The consumers growing up now, they will demand of everyone producing and offering products that they are sustainable and clean. So it's about doing business to be a part of investing in this transition, I think.
So we have to continue to ensure that we flow capital and reallocate capital into all of this. So really make this happen, and I think it's upon all of us actually to do that. And with that, I want to say thank you for being here early and starting this Finance Day. Very good panel. Thank you very much.